Good morning, everyone. Great to see a full room. There's still room in the front if you want to grab a seat. This is being recorded, just to let you all know. My name is Shirley Ivan. I am a senior cloud advisor with AWS. I work with organizations on their cloud journey, looking at how to introduce AWS mechanisms and approaches into migrating and innovating into the cloud. And I'm really fortunate to have three of our customers here to talk about their stories and how their journey to AWS Cloud has really, how they've gone through it and what they've done. They're at different stages of their journey, so we're going to hear different perspectives. The intent is for you to really learn from them, to learn their experiences, what they've seen so far, what's working, what's not. They've got great, interesting stories, and maybe we'll start. They're going to give you a little bit of background on each of them, and then we're going to go through some questions and answers, and then we've left about 10 minutes at the end for your questions. This is right before the keynote, so there are plenty of spaces over there. You don't need to rush out, and we hope that you enjoy this session. So I'll let them get started. Do you want to go ahead, Joe?
Sure, I'll kick it off. Thanks, Shirley. So Joe Wong, Vice President, Enterprise Technology Solutions at Coast Capital Savings. We're the largest member-owned credit union in Canada with around 572,000 members, 52 branches, and about $20 billion in assets under management. We started our cloud journey about 2 years ago, and what really made us rethink technology and IT was our intent to expand nationally. So we just recently, last year, we received OSFI approval to become a federal credit union. So what that really meant to us was, instead of only being BC based, which is what we were last year, now we have the permission to expand right across Canada like any other bank or any federal credit union. And so with that came, how were we going to expand across Canada? And for us, it really was about digital. Digital being the tip of the spear. Building branches takes too long, costs too much. You're talking $2 million a branch, 12 months to build a branch if you can find the right location. And so that really challenged us to rethink how we were going to launch a digital platform. And this is when we came upon AWS and the cloud. And it really started to unlock a massive capability. We were looking a lot at fintechs and the disruption happening in the financial services industry. And one of the key things that enabled the fintechs to really start to disrupt financial services was their speed and ability to launch new systems and services. And a lot of it was based on the cloud. So we actually took a page out of what the fintechs were doing. We dug a little bit deeper within that. AWS has been an amazing partner in helping us learn through that journey. And so we're about 3 years into our journey now. We're about to launch our new digital platform in a couple of weeks, so it's super exciting at Coast. Our plan is basically our entire digital banking platform is on AWS, really helping us to drive the speed and agility and also drive innovation. Because if you have kids today, do you think they will ever walk into a branch? No, right? They're going to use their mobile app, right? I mean, for us, a key thing for us was just last December, our mobile traffic exceeded all web traffic. So that was a big tipping point for us and a realization, the mobile application device, the speed and the user expectation, member expectation was very high. And that's how, AWS was really a foundational piece for us.
Okay, great, thank you. Paul, how about you?
Good afternoon, or good morning, I should say.
Morning.
Haven't had enough coffee yet. I'm director for the development team that builds the applications that you use for Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada. That covers all of the temporary resident, permanent resident applications, and passport applications, and some of the other grants and contribution programs. We have a large array of applications, which today are 80% paper, 20% digital. We are on a digital journey, so we cannot turn this over one day over the next, and we don't have a mobile strategy, unfortunately. It's not conducive to our marketplace. In fact, our clientele is not only, when we're talking about passports, it's Canada. When we're talking about temporary residence, it's the world. So we have people coming in to work for visits, to study. They all use our systems. So we've embarked on a digital journey. So we're not only applying agile project methodologies, we're going through a digital design principles workshops to modernize and to digitize the experience. So we want to not only offer the service we did, which granted was paper-based, and if you ever used a PDF form filler, it's not the greatest experience in the world, to a true modern, easy-to-use interface. So we're down this journey. Project by project, we are moving various pieces to the cloud. We will never be truly a 100% cloud in the current state. Our goal is to go to a hybrid cloud model where a lot of these intake tools are actually residing in cloud. It creates a separation from our core systems, and our systems of record remain on-premise in heavily fortified environments. We are underway with this. We've launched one successful program on cloud. We have 2 more which are in the foundry right now being developed, and we have about 4 or 5 in our backlog that within the next few years will come on board. So you'll see a lot of noise coming around the whole digital experience. We're also the largest consumer of GCKey. So if those of you are following GCKey, we are directly involved in the evolution of that as well. As you know, things don't move as fast as they do in private sector and government, so we have umpteen layers of governance and approvals, but this is the direction we're taking. Unfortunately, you cannot buy an immigration system. You have to build it. I got the easy job. The team that works for me are brilliant, and I'm in awe in how I'm surrounded by these people. On a day-to-day basis, I just can't keep up. So these are the people that truly make this happen, and we are building these systems out. It's a great experience.
Thank you. Ben.
Good morning, it's great to be here. My name is Ben, and my journey to the cloud was heavily influenced by time that I spent in Silicon Valley. So prior to that, I studied engineering at Waterloo, worked on some really big projects that were fascinating, but kind of pre-cloud for me. BlackBerry was one. I worked and helped NASA get the shuttle back in space with an extension that we built to the Canadarm. And I worked at CERN, the particle physics accelerator, where the World Wide Web was first kind of born. But ultimately, my most fascinating shift was when I moved to Silicon Valley to help build my first startup, a company called Presto.com. And what we did is we modernized and migrated from paper-based menus in restaurants to digital tablets. So now you could order and pay without having to wait. And that technology, those tablets that we built, a hardware-software play, they're in every Applebee's in the United States. So that was my first foray into that world and really understanding the power of software in terms of eating the world and cloud being a major component to disrupting and evolving major industries. So the first one was restaurants for me. The second, I was a co-founder at a company called ClearBank. You may recognize this. One of my co-founders is a judge on the Dragon's Den show. And that company is deploying $1 billion in capital this year. So it's cool to be here with Joe because I've got some experience in terms of working in the fintech space. And again, seeing how the banking industry was really disrupted by a lot of these technologies in a very positive way. We could not have built that business without Amazon and a number of products that we pieced together initially that were available via the cloud. So couple big experiences building tech companies, but I've been passionate about government my whole life. I grew up in Manitoba and job shadowed my mayor and premier, and then I moved here to Ottawa and worked as a page in the House of Commons for a year. And I even ran for MP in the Yukon in the last federal election. So I've been trying to kind of figure out how to bring some of what I've learned in the private sector with technology and cloud services to government. And that's what I'm doing with Proof. So we've assembled a team that's all worked in tech and government, And we're tackling the problem that you described, Paul, the umpteen number of approvals. We believe that this is the central problem or core function of government. It's hard to do anything without dozens of people signing off on it. And so with Proof, we've built a digital platform to help streamline all of those approvals. So you can instantly track exactly where they are, and who they're with, and cut out a lot of the red tape in the process. And we're working with governments at all levels across Canada now to do that. In the Yukon, for example, we're rolling out government-wide to the government of Yukon. And in some departments, 90% of the entire department is using our platform every week. And so there's some really interesting experiences there that I'd be happy to kind of elaborate on further. Our migrations and some of the experience that I'm happy to elaborate on a bit further too range from some self-governing First Nations in the north that we've helped migrate to AWS. This experience with the Yukon government too, and rolling out software throughout an entire organization. And we are working with some of Canada's top 10 cities to bring them their first ever continuous deployment kind of cloud integrated solution. And we are spinning up our first deployment with the federal government as well in Transport Canada. So our company has bootstrapped until now. We're just raising our first round of financing. And we've done a lot with a small 6-person team, in part because of the technologies that Amazon and cloud helps to provide us with. We just finished a program called Techstars. And so I'm really happy to be here today.
So maybe just building on that organizational impacts, and maybe just starting with you, Ben, just because you just finished. How does it affect your organization in terms of what they can try, what they can innovate, and what does AWS provide you from a cloud-based perspective to allow that to happen as you work with those constituents to really understand what their requirements are unique to their different levels of government or their different sectors?
Sure, there's so many benefits, as I'm sure many of those of you in the audience know. One that I find interesting is the security enhancement in cloud technology, especially when you can leverage all of the investment that Amazon has made, for example, is incredible. And it used to be that in Silicon Valley, 20 years ago, if I was building my startup back then, we'd have to stand up our own infrastructure, and that would be hugely time-consuming. There's no way we could do it as secure as something like Amazon offers today. And we often encounter this with governments who are uncomfortable or worried about kind of the implications of moving from an on-prem solution to the cloud. But on the security front, I know because my CTO did PhD work in cryptology and worked for D&D and is ex-Google, and there's just some clear benefits on the security side. But that is something that we're helping to kind of educate folks toward, because there is always, it's human nature to be wary of these kinds of transitions. But I've seen them happen in other industries. Security in the fintech space, we were building banking technology, definitely more secure on that front. The other point I want to point to, I think, in terms of benefits is the elasticity. When we think about our business, the primary focus is always the users. What can we do to make the experience better for our users? And for me, that often means how do we make the life better for our development team? And we do that by keeping them focused. If they don't have to spend time standing up and configuring infrastructure, they can focus more on delivering the features that our users need to make them happy. And that ultimately happens because they don't have to spend a lot of time getting approvals to provision more compute resources. With the elasticity of cloud, not only is it more cost effective, but ultimately you can spin things up in an on-demand way that really allows us to stay laser focused on the thing that we do best. And we're empowered to do that by handing over some control to something like Amazon to let them do what they do really well and support us in that effort.
Great, thanks. And Joe, what about you, 3 years into your journey? How have your team changed, and what is are their outlooks different? How does your development team operate? How do they work with the business side?
Yeah, it's been quite drastic how it's changed. I recall a conversation with my team when I first joined Coast, and I'd been with Coast for only 3 years, and I would ask, if we, how big do you think our data center will be 3 years from now? Will it be bigger, smaller, or the same size? 9 out of the 10 told me it would be bigger. That shocked me, right? And now when I talked to them today, and we're actually in a process of moving a data center from Victoria, actually closing it down and setting one up in Ontario, it's probably a third the size. And something that was really cool, and I always like to see it, is I got basically a 2-for-1, right? We worked with our data center provider, and they basically said, how about I give you that data center at no additional cost back in Ontario, because we had another data center in Kamloops that we were shrinking as well. And so it was quite a cool deal, right? When I'm getting a 2-for-1, as I say. So you rarely get that in technology. But from a development standpoint and how they view development, the very traditional, waterfall, takes time to set up an environment. You've got siloed infrastructure, a DBA who's separate from your web server guy, who's separate from your developer. We've merged all that, right? It's really about full stack development, about the automation that we've heavily automated within AWS. The beauty is we're able to fire up environments in 5 minutes and not having to, beg a DBA that, hey, please, can I have another database? I need to do something different, or go out and buy a server, wait for it to come in, and then all of a sudden install it. It just takes way too long. So it's really transformed how we do development. And ultimately for the business, I'll say the wonderful side effect is it's actually built more credibility with my business, more trust, because they're quite amazed at the speed and agility we can move at now compared to 5 years ago, right? So, the cloud is a little bit of the secret sauce for us, and I really like what Ben said about security too. Absolutely nailed it. There's no way I'm going to set up a Type 2 SOC 2 data center. If any of you know what that is, it is to the highest standards of data centers, which Amazon does, and the level of encryption and the security controls, our organization would have to invest heavily in that, and that would just detract and distract from what we really needed to do in innovating for our members. So,
great, thank you. So, Paul, extending on that, what is the innovation philosophy for IRCC? What's the future look like as you're innovating with that team of great people that you have?
Well, if anybody's been in meetings with me, one of the things that I start with is let's challenge the current state. One of the things that is an absolute killer for innovation is someone saying, I'm going to do it this way because I've been doing it this way. I'm trained in this, and I've been doing it for 15 years, and we have to go this way. That is the first barrier to remove. The other thing that we're trying to push is to, I hate to demean that we're in a great venue set up by Amazon, this is wonderful, but we're trying to abstract and reduce our tie specific lock-in to vendors. Okay. So Amazon has actually been a great example of a market leader in this sector where we can actually abstract our technologies. We design and architect our solutions saying, I need a directory service, and I'll go get the best of breed from that service provider. Same thing from a database, an app server, whatever you can imagine. Identity and access management is another layer that we're talking about. So in that area, we're trying to abstract it. We're also trying to put in best practices and reusable modules. We have a demand of about 800 projects. We can do about 40 at a time per quarter right now. We just can't answer the whole demand. So we're trying to put in tools and methodologies, and AWS has been a great partner of ours to try and bring that forward. So
do you expect that to be more of a hockey stick, so that as you automate more, as you introduce new tools and new mechanisms, that you can increase the amount of innovation that you're
Unfortunately, a year ago, we had 8 different interface programming languages. If anybody wants to use anything other than Angular Java for a client-side app on our side, they need a very good justification. We're taking out some of the proprietary, hard-to-find resources. We like to abstract it, again, to a layer where we can actually build reusable code, reusable modules. We've gone into automated code building, so we use a code repository with automatic checks and balances, code reviews with penetration testing and security testing all applied to it before we push it. So there's a lot of things that we're doing from a government perspective that goes outside the norms of how we've done things in government. And that's kind of pushing that envelope. Of course, We meet pockets of resistance, and I try to be the bulldozer that removes those for the team.
And so that brings up a great point about guardrails. So Joe, in your sector, what are those types of guardrails that you introduce and the governance that allows you to go fast and innovate?
Yeah, that's, the technology with Amazon, it allows you to move at a breathtaking speed. But I think a little bit of the dark side is the governance and who's allowed to spin up instances and who's allowed to create all this infrastructure on the fly with a few clicks, right? So that was really important for us. We've actually set up a dedicated cloud governance team. And so they're focused on measuring the cloud cost as well as the provisioning of cloud infrastructure. Okay. So that's something, as they say, right, with great power comes great responsibility, right? So you're getting a huge amount of power with AWS, and you just have to be a little bit careful. You always hear those stories of teams who'd accidentally clicked on something, and all of a sudden overnight they've allocated 1,000 CPUs, overnight, and they come in the next day and they're like, gee, I just got a bill for $10,000. So we're trying to avoid that, that's for sure.
And that's, as part of what we see with customers through their journey is that kind of the more mature they get, the more, the governance does come into play. And it's not a question of saying no, but just a question of saying, have we double checked, right? Are we doing the right things? Are we putting the right checks and balances in place? And as organizations mature, introducing more of that business oversight and ensuring that you can manage your bill and understand where that bill is being spent. So no, that's great. Ben, you wanted to add something?
I think some great points were raised there, in terms of, one of the things that a startup aspires to do is to not have too much governance, right? And to really create space to be creative and innovate. And so that's a dichotomy sometimes that we're faced with, given that we are a startup, a tech startup, but serving government. I think it's a really exciting time right now, especially in the federal government, where we're seeing a cloud-first policy adopted, right? And there's a lot of cool stuff coming out of CDS, and there are these amazing pockets of innovative teams in a number of departments now that are really saying, hey, it's not just kind of cool to try a new way, but it's necessary, it's needed. We have to do this, The people we're serving, our users in government, are ultimately citizens and businesses, right? And they have access to so many of these tools now on their mobile phone, from everything else in the private world, and we ought to deliver that same level of experience in government. So I'm constantly inspired by the people I get to meet in government who are really taking on this mission and working through a lot of redefining some of these, historic legacy legislative pieces or governance. Kind of, this is the way we've always done it, so we have to continue to do that. And I think that inductive kind of reasoning isn't one that is positive for future growth. And in the private sector, you can only stay alive and grow if you are thinking about new ways of doing things. I'm often reminded, that government sometimes has a bit of a monopoly, but also a responsibility to do things in new ways. And, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the story of Estonia. I'm an e-resident of Estonia. Estonia got hacked hard, 10 years ago, had to rebuild their infrastructure. And in doing so, they've done some really cool things. Lots on the blockchain. This e-residency specifically allows me as a business to incorporate my business remotely without ever going to Estonia and plug into the EU banking system. And so effectively, what that means, and because Estonia is getting more applications for their e-residency than natural births, this is a way that a government or a country can increase their tax base without incurring additional tax burden. And I think that's a game-changing kind of situation where it means that governments could be competing with one another for talent in a way that we haven't seen before. And so there's an importance beyond just productivity internally to really everything that we're doing here. And cutting through a lot of that governance, but setting it up in new ways, because it's important to have it in any big organization, is critical. And that's the hard part that I know many of you are working on right now.
Yeah, and you raise an interesting perspective that, you know, my Twitter feed every day has new departments sharing new information, and I love how open it is and how, you know, one department is learning one thing and sharing those best practices, and you know, we have to keep enabling that. So Paul, do you see that? Like, are you able to kind of build on what others have done and bring that into what you're doing at IRCC?
We rely heavily on being an open book and working in the open. We invite anybody to exchange with. We'll learn. We interact on a regular basis. We've built partnerships with TBS for some of the new signing Canada strategies. We're working with SSC to try and engineer the path to the cloud. Obviously, we have security constraints that we have to deal with as federal government that we're working through. However, it is key to interact and exchange. We are in a bit of a unique space, is that we have a extremely high traffic front end, which is non-standard to typical government environments. So more of our interactions, of our modeling, actually is based off of the large commercial vendors. So when we looked at modeling on AWS example, we looked at one of the famous apps, which is Netflix, as an example, on how they actually worked on AWS. That was a better learning experience. So again, we're challenging the current state, trying to think as innovators and thought leaders in government to try and bring that private experience.
That's fantastic. So, got a few minutes left. So the last thing that everybody loves to hear are those war stories, right? What could you do? What would you do differently now that having done, knowing where you are today and what you've done in the past? What would you change if you could go back and change? So maybe Joe, we'll start with you.
Sure. You know, I've been pretty fortunate that we didn't have any major gotchas along the way, but I would have definitely included the much broader technology team in the discussions on AWS and the cloud. We originally approached it from a very traditional server, desktop, data center approach. Hey, look, this is gonna make everything more efficient. But you really don't truly unlock the power of AWS in the cloud until you start layering on security, application development around DevOps, you know, automation, and just the elasticity of you know, demand and supply that you can manage to really bring that synergy. So that would be one big thing I'd do over again. It's tough, right? When you have a big team. I have a team of about 136 people. You know, you really can't send everyone. So you choose to send the ones, and you know, my goal was always to turn them into advocates, right? Advocates within technology to kind of push within themselves to move to the cloud, as opposed to, you know, having someone at the top or leader kind of dictating to them, this is what you must do, because I read a white paper on it. It's really cool. So,
Good stuff, Paul.
It's hard. We're in the journey. We're blessed of having a great team, support from our senior leadership, which sometimes are risk adverse. We have leadership that is saying, okay, drive forward, drive innovation. I just wish in some cases we could start always afresh and not take what was old and bring it into the new, because that is proving to being probably a harder hurdle to tackle than something that's net new. But the journey is excellent. The people we work with on a daily basis are amazing. The support from AWS has been great.
I mean, you're lucky you've got that big stack of paper type approaches, right? So those will be easy to start figuring out the way to digitize.
One would say it's easy, but there's some legacy, like QR codes that have been installed into an Adobe Java applet in there that are causing us nightmares to try and bring into a digital world. So there's always those legacies. If we could start with a fresh program, I think that would be far easier.
Well, I'm excited to see getting rid of that form and fill, so
well,
I'll
our
keep
goal is to
keep
be able
monitoring
to
that.
bring the passport renewal process online so you can do it from your home. That's our long-term goal.
And Ben, finally with you.
That's an awesome goal. I can't
Yeah.
wait. I'm excited about that. Anyone who stood in a passport line, you know, I'm sure is thrilled and excited by that. You know, I wish that we could flip a switch and just go right to cloud overnight. It would be easier, you know, in many ways, it would solve a lot of the problems that our team faces every day. But that is a reality that is not as easy to implement as we might want. And so there are steps in between that are important. When I think about my first company, Presto, restaurants, we were having to integrate with old 30-year-old POS systems, point of sale terminals. That was really tough. And at Clearbank, we had a hard time integrating with a bunch of legacy banking technologies to leverage our work too. When I think about some of the early days with Proof, when we were migrating some of these First Nations communities in the north over to AWS, we literally had to drive out in some instances with external hard drives, to help move some of their files over to S3 due to kind of fiber connectivity challenges and whatnot, So that's a good reminder for me that the steps are always iterative. And when I think about this as someone who, I wrote the code for our first application for our early product. And as a coder, as a developer, I always run into this problem where, hey, it's not working on my machine, but the same thing's working on yours. Like, oh, well, what's the problem? We're both running the same code, right? And that's true if the application code is the same, but often the challenges that I think get in the way most for developers and development teams are these things around the infrastructure itself, right? And so one of the benefits we've found as a stepping stone toward kind of cloud fully is containerization and documenting that process. So often what falls down, we find, whenever you're doing a migration, is that the steps involved in standing up a service aren't well established. We're writing kind of bash scripts and things on the fly, and so that often doesn't transition well, and you lose a lot of time trying to kind of make that part of it work, and it gets in the way, again, from what you're doing for users to build features. So something like Docker has been an incredible path for us as a way to deploy, even in some cases on-prem, but still retain some of the ability to introduce more infrastructure as code. And so by that I mean, not just having the application itself shared on a repository, but actually the steps involved in spinning up the infrastructure as well. And whenever we're making these kind of big changes, there's always an impatience to kind of move quickly. And the reality is, it's important to get that part really right, to document it well, so that as you scale, you can leverage that benefit by bringing on more people and doing it in a consistent way. And that's, I think those are the kinds of things that are possible more and more because of, the tools that Amazon's making available.
That's some great advice. And actually, Joe, what about you? Any advice for the audience? There's a lot of folks here that are still kind of kicking the tires, still trying to get started, not really sure what this is going to look like. What advice would you give them?
My advice would be focus on your people, focus on your team. I've been super fortunate to be at Coast Capital Savings, and the culture is amazing, and we invest heavily in our teams. So when we started to move along the journey to the cloud, it was a typical change management dilemma, right? I had an amazing team who was really great at, say, setting up data centers and were amazing DBAs, and that was, I would say, those were the skills from the 90s. And so how was I going to help them as a leader move into the cloud? Because I didn't want to take the position that I needed a whole new team, because that's actually just too easy and not the right thing to do. So we invested heavily on our team and helped paint the journey to where we wanted to go. And we were really deliberate in trying to build advocates within the team and not have it as much a top-down, well, management says we need to do this because it's going to save us all this money and bring amazing things. So have the patience there. AWS was a great partner in the training, and they offered to come over and do immersion days. They helped me get past the barriers with legal and procurement, because back then, Our procurement had never seen a cloud contract before. Legal was totally freaked out. I think they're paid by the word, so every contract would come back red. So I was like, whoa, I need help from AWS, so that then, the AWS team back on the West Coast, they sent their legal and procurement team to meet with my legal and procurement team. I just watched them, and then at the end, it was really interesting to see that legal and procurement came over to me and said, okay, so when are we going to do this? Which was pretty amazing. It used to be, it felt like I was pushing this huge boulder uphill with them. So, but to me, it comes back to your team. You've got amazing talent. You just got to unlock it. It is a journey. It's well worth it. And I'll just say, I've doubled in size my team in 3 years. I haven't lost anybody, and I went to the cloud. Because what we saw happening was, moving to the cloud created a whole new other set of skills that I needed on my team, and it also unlocked demand from our business. They could see how quickly we could innovate and come out with new features. They wanted more, and they were willing to support us and fund more to get more, because we were continually to deliver. So if you can get in that, what I call the Goldilocks stage, and not too hot, not too cold, just right, it's just perfect. Right, but to me, it all starts with the team and investing in your team and making the journey together to reap the benefits.
Paul?
I'd say Joe nailed it. Our ADM says culture kills innovation. Basically, is what she keeps saying, and we invest heavily into your people. We need to have the strong people. If it wasn't for the team that we have, we would not be able to do or deliver what we do consistently. Investing in that team, making sure you have the right synergy, and sometimes too, you have great strong performers that just don't work in a team. So those are the adjustments. Pay attention to the team, because they're the people that'll drive that ball to the finish line. Also from an innovation perspective is don't be scared of what you don't know. A lot of people get tied into the protectionist attitude because they're afraid of something new because they don't know it. Embrace the change, and those are some of the key things or takeaways for us.
That's great, thank you. So Ben, you want to add?
Yeah, just a couple of quick thought on that. I want to underscore what Joe said because I'm seeing that in many places. It's remarkable what Amazon has done in 20 years, and that's because they have attracted incredible talent and retained that talent. And that's fundamentally important for any organization that's trying to accomplish something. And this point you made, Joe, about attracting people by giving them the opportunity to grow and play with and learn some of the newer technologies is vital. There's 2 GovTech companies that I know in the United States, and one is bigger but growing more slowly, and the other is smaller but catching up quickly. And that it's entirely because they've chosen a stack that is much more modern and new, and that is allowing them to attract people. I talked yesterday with a developer in the federal government, and she said that everyone's kind of leaving and wanting to switch to another department that is being more innovative, more progressive, because people want to grow and learn, and that is such an important part of it. You can't do anything without the team. The other point I just want to introduce here is this is a critical component to innovation. In order to innovate, you must embrace failure, full stop. And I think that's particularly challenging in government when there's a standard and expectation of delivery that is different or born out of a culture, perhaps, of a different time. And fundamentally, startups get this. This is the ethos of Silicon Valley. The whole way in which to build a great product is to recognize that you can't do it on paper. You have to get in and try something and know it's not going to work well the first time and expect that it will continue to struggle. But if you can shorten the iteration loop on that learning to make each successive iteration better, that is the only way I know in which to actually get to a great outcome. And so, pilots, proof of concepts, these should be considered instrumental pieces in any kind of RP or process that better inform ultimately what you're trying to do. I think that's so important.
Oh, that's great. So, a few minutes left. Questions from the audience. Is there other questions that we haven't answered that are burning you want to ask? Keeping you up at night.
Great session. Awesome. So totally agree with you, Ben. innovation is to be discovered. It's not by design, right? So relative to that, and all the reimagining that's underneath, right? So you have a starting point in your processes and with your policies. You mentioned it, Joe, I think as well, Paul, about trying not to start with the way it is. So what's the engagement with AWS or without? What's the work that you've had to do to get on top of reimagining the experience first, instead of just assuming that that PDF filler document is the way to go?
Sure. I'd say the key was, and this is where we knocked on AWS's door as we're trying through this journey, and right away there was a heartbeat. AWS opened the doors and provided some training, provided some knowledge sharing sessions. We've also engaged with AWS with an enterprise support agreement so that we have constant dialogue with AWS. We also involved AWS in reviewing architectures. So these are things that we're looking at. And again, we're investing in training. We want to train our folks, and we have an army of people, from full-time employees to contractors. Contractors we're encouraging to get cloud certified, and in our FTEs we're investing heavily to go to the cloud route for training. We're also entertaining new products, trying to bring stimulating work environments for people, also trying to bring in tools, as you say, to facilitate that uptake. So we want to reduce the amount of code we write. We want to build more solutions. Unfortunately, we have this albatross around our neck, which is the past. So we're trying to take that off and move forward, and that's a day-to-day challenge for us. So I didn't say we have it perfectly, but we are dealing with that on a regular basis.
We'll add something quickly to that. What was your name, sorry? Vanessa, thank you so much for the question, Vanessa. Yeah. I think there's something that the government is doing very well right now, which is consultation, kind of engaging people. There's a lot of great shipping of culture that's happening right now. My challenge to you would be to find ways to ship more execution, and that's an important stage that shouldn't just happen sequentially, but should happen in parallel. And so our organization has had 3,000 conversations with government officials at all levels across the country, but we didn't do that first for a year without building anything, and then started building. We've been doing it continuously. And we have built-in chat support on our application, our web app, which is table stakes in the private sector, but not always something you see in government. So you don't have to necessarily go through the help desk. You can talk to us in real time. And that is not only helpful in terms of us helping to onboard you and solve your problems, but it's vital for us to keep that communication happening back two ways so that we can iterate and keep making things better. That's what I would add to it.
And maybe just adding to Ben, I would say be careful, right? Don't get buried in consultations and everyone's opinion. Ben's alluding to, get a minimum viable product out, get the data, get your system out there, get the live data and feedback, and then iterate on your product. Because there's a tendency for everybody wanting to get it perfect, but you just have to realize it's never going to be perfect. Right? And you do need the help of everyone else providing you that feedback to get it to bring it closer to, I'll say, perfection. So, and I mean, what we did at Coast was we used a lot of POCs, as Ben said, POCs, pilots. We try a ton of things. At my leadership table, we'd meet every week and we'd talk about what didn't work. We used to call them, what were the turkeys of the week, right? And have a good laugh about that, right? Because I needed my leaders to believe that it was okay. That, years of going through school and university, everybody had to be perfect and get the highest score and not make a mistake. You're trying to undo all that now and say, hey, look, we're going to learn the most from our mistakes. Let's just quickly recover. What did we learn? And let's just move forward. So,
great.
Good stuff. Is there another question? Somebody in the back? Did. All the way over there, behind the camera. I want to see you run, David.
My question is around maybe for Joe more than So you're running a hybrid environment, and clearly there's reasons for it. I'm just curious to know in your team of 136 how you've structured your strategy in terms of anything new that we're going to do. It's going to be cloud first, maybe. Or what are some of the things that we're doing in the data center? So in terms of your operations as well. So what's your strategy and what's your operation level split? And how do you expect, as time moves on, you would move those skill sets and train them up into cloud technologies?
Wow, that's a pretty deep question. I can probably take an hour answering that one. But you know, the short answer is, you know, I think one is we do leverage our partners a lot, right? We use them as accelerators. So, you know, I have a team of 136, but I also have some pretty strong partners working with me. So whether it's AWS or AWS platinum partners, as well as some global firms. Yeah, we're definitely running a hybrid cloud, right, in our data centers. And I'll tell you this, we do have a cloud-first strategy. And the advice is, you know, get support from your board and your executive team, because that's what we did. And it helped tremendously from, you know, support, funding, acceleration on the roadmap. But at the same time, too, we said it was a cloud-first strategy, wait for it, where it made sense. So we didn't blindly let's just grab all our apps and jam them, I call it jam it into the cloud. We were very opportunistic. We said if an application was about to be evergreen or we needed to upgrade it, right away the first thing we looked at was, can we put this into a cloud, right? And did it make sense, all right, from an operating model perspective, and what was the usage pattern, et cetera. From an organizational structure, we do have a dedicated cloud team. We've restructured our team, and I continue to do it. So I have a team dedicated just to whether it's cloud architecture, design, governance, and execution. But as well, I rely heavily on partners too, just to handle those peaks and valleys. And yeah, that's kind of generally it. And happy to go into more detail if you want to give me your card afterwards, and I can share much more in detail our journey.
We've got about a minute and a half left, so is there one more question?
Sure. There's a growing shortfall of skilled workers in the technology sector. So could you speak a little bit about, from a post-secondary perspective, what core skills would be required from that fresh computer science or engineering graduate so that they have that opportunity to get a position in your organization with little or no experience?
Who wants to go first? I love that question. Yeah.
Well, I could take from our perspective. I have 4 teams. I've got a data platforms team, a CRM team, because all our core is in CRM, an integration team, and an e-services team. Based off of the specific requirements, we actually have targeted hiring strategies. So if we have, especially in our e-services, if we have university, college graduates that have a Java background, we're trying to hunt them right now. So if you know any of your university students studying Java who want to come work in immigration systems, come see us. When we're talking integration, people talk about more algorithms, more scientific-based. CRM is a different skill sets, and data platforms you're talking about structured data elements and management of those. So based on those skill sets, we go hunt. We are actually at all the
FSWEP program is a great example of people, students trying out a career in the federal government, right? Working in a co-op and then having the opportunity to continue. So it's, those analytical skills, those problem-solving skills, the user interface skills, right? Being user-centric design, those are all
and you bring a good point. I think the highest growth area we're seeing right now is in UX design. Yeah. There's not enough students in UX design today coming out of the schools to satisfy the demand. As soon as we see one come across in the students, we'll bring them right on board. We won't even interview them, we'll just give them a job offer.
Joe, Ben?
Sure, yeah. So in high school, I learned Visual Basic over a couple of years. In university, I studied electrical engineering, so there was some overlap with computer engineering. Did some coding, but not as much as I would have liked. Something that was a game changer for me was a program called Lighthouse Labs, which is a 2-month boot camp you know, and it's not something that will teach you to code to a senior level fully in that time. It does rely on the practical experience that comes after it, but what I learned in that gave me enough of a refresher with some of the modern tools to build my first application here before bringing on more of a development team. And ultimately, what's important to realize is that the code bases and the frameworks are always evolving and changing. What's most important is to provoke a sense of curiosity and to understand. The thing that I learned most at that coding boot camp was not how to build in Ruby, it was actually how to go and figure out how to get unstuck when I was stuck. And so that's an example of how in a relatively short amount of time, I was able to level up in a considerable manner. And I think combining that with more applications, so you know, for me, less theory was really helpful, more applications, kind of co-op opportunities. Code for Canada is a really cool program. And what I would say is coding to an extent is a language that is going to be increasingly important in a new digital world. And so as much as, you know, I benefited by my parents putting me in French immersion, and that has helped me in ways that you're all familiar with in the federal government, I think the same is true for putting your kids into, or getting them exposed in some sense to coding, because that is going to be a tool that will open up so many doors regardless of what they end up doing.
So I was trying to be a good host and keep us on schedule. We're actually late. I can hear the music in the other room. So thank you all so much. I think we'll be available for questions after the keynote if folks want to find us. Definitely interesting conversation. Thank you all for attending. And we'll hopefully, if you're coming back this afternoon, I'll see you later at my session this afternoon. Thank you.